It's a great day in the 99th District, and I want to start this presentation by recapping some of the events of this past weekend as it relates to three critical issues I've been working on. As you well know, Cognac Day was a smashing success. Again, this year, 1,700 reenactors came from all over the nation. Canada was the largest gathering of veterans for a World War II reenactment ever. And it is the largest national such event. But at any rate, was there to celebrate. There were 5 members of veterans from World War II who received Legion of Honor medals from the French government. So it was a fantastic day. From there, my wife and I went on down the lake to Lakeshore Park to the Blue Line Support Rally for our good men and women in law enforcement who take such good care of us and risk everything for our well-being. But that, again, was at Lakeshore Park. And from there, we went to Ashtabula City, where the Wine and Walleye Festival was taking place, a fantastic celebration of our fisheries and our local wineries. And finally, we headed on out to Geneva-on-the-Lake to put a bow on the whole day. And this trip, as you may have guessed, on a Saturday night was overcrowded and full of people just having a good time. Now, I mention this because there's one common denominator, and that is our Great Lake. Lake Erie is such an asset and such a gift, and we often take it for granted, but we should not, and let me explain to you why. Earlier this summer, I attended a national conference of state legislators in Washington State. And I was talking to a number of legislators from around the country. But while we were there, Washington, a number of forest fires broke out. They are currently experiencing the first statewide drought conditions in their entire history. And in a similar fashion, you know the drought problems that Southern California is having. It's going to be interesting and tragic to watch the tension between the city folk and the agricultural community, both vying for that precious commodity, which we have in spades, if you will, with Lake Erie. Now, I mention this because I had a conversation Saturday night with a woman from Erie, Pennsylvania, who was visiting. It was Geneva-on-the-Lake, originally from Montana. And she said, you know, we have the mountains of Montana, and it's beautiful, but you have something even more important. You have water. And that's what ties these three issues together. First of all, yesterday I attended a meeting sponsored by the Farmers Union to look at, amongst other things, the local food movement. And it's important to know that there are various farmers markets taking place around the county, around the district, and they're well attended, but there's far more room for growth. And let me explain to you what I mean. Those of you old enough to remember, Dunbar's Glass Acre, if you recall, used to be a thriving business at the base of Woodman Avenue. And back in the 1920s, from what I've read, they would ship tomatoes all around the United States. In fact, we were known in some areas as the tomato capital of the United States. There is a great potential for us here in the agricultural sector to help feed the United States, feed the world population as we experience tremendous growth over the next few decades. There's supposed to be 9 billion people by 2050 here on this planet, and with stressed out resources, with water shortages, with climate change taking place, we are well situated with our water, with that Great Lake, to help feed this growing, burgeoning population. But we have to manage it well. And so at this point, we're laying the groundwork for local food consumption. We need to work on the processing side so that we can indeed, because we have the transportation with the railroads, with the docks, even with the airport, to ship this around the world. So agriculture could provide, and does provide already, a good deal of employment for those in the 99th District. Coupled with that, we're also looking at an issue that is dear to my heart, and that's CAUV challenges that our agricultural community is facing. CAUV stands for Current Agricultural Use Value. And briefly, back in the 1970s, a deal was struck with our farmers, with our residential folks within the state legislature. We were moving rapidly from an agrarian state to a more urban and suburban state, and thanks in part to the Interstate Highway Program, which allowed urban sprawl to take place, and more people were simply moving to the urban areas. Well, here was the issue. Most of the state budget goes to school funding, no doubt about it. And there was a compromise struck by Democrats and Republicans alike in the 1970s that we would tax agricultural land at a lesser value, and that's where the current agricultural use value comes in, so as to balance this disproportionate share of taxation with, at the same time, the creation of a state income tax, so that those who didn't live on the farm would be sharing their or paying their fair share of taxes through income, and those on the farm would still be maintaining their share, but with the risk associated with farming, it would be far less than it had been. So this compromise was struck. Now here's where the things go off the rails. The current administration is committed to reducing income taxes. Well, if we still have school funding, and that has been under stress by budget cuts from the state government prior to my time there, if we still have a need for school funding, and we do, and we continue to shrink income taxes, it only makes logical sense that more funding is going to come from somewhere else. And that is why, in part, you'll hear many of the farm community worried and adamant about increased tax. Some of their taxes have gone up 300%. So I have tried in the legislature to work with my colleagues to ease the burden so that we can keep this agricultural sector going. Many of these farmers are on the brink of bankruptcy, and we cannot lose them given the growing need for agricultural production. We just have to keep moving ahead in terms of being able to feed the world population. So I don't want to tax them out of existence, and I don't necessarily want to shift the burden so that one sector of our population is getting overtaxed, but we need to re-examine how this burden is shared. And we've been pushing for that in the Ohio House. We'll see where that takes us, but I know it's a growing concern. I'm working on it, and if you remember, I helped form the CAUV task force, which convened last September and met all the way through March of this year in order to promote changes and suggestions to the Ohio Department of Taxation. Sad to say, it's fallen on deaf ears. We haven't been able to get them or the administration to move on this, but I am committed to working to that end. So concerned about agriculture, concerned about our lake, and that ties in with the last issue then that's related here to our Great Lake, and that is injection wells. If you remember, again, back in July, I hosted a hearing with two other legislators, Representative Sean O'Brien and Representative Mike O'Brien, both from Trumbull County, at the county courthouse. The commissioners opened their doors to us, and we heard testimony from township trustees, from citizens, about the growing concern related to injection wells. According to federal law, we cannot stop interstate commerce, and that includes brine coming in from out of state. And being a border county, we receive a lot of brine from Pennsylvania. And the concern is that there aren't enough controls on these injection wells. In sum, we have been working on, and right now it's almost a 30-page document, and it's going to grow because that was a rough draft. We are looking to reform this industry, and I want to share with you some of the highlights of the thing that would be in this legislation. And I want to stress the fact that we are not anti-fracking or anti-business or anti-progress in terms of developing and creating jobs. There is a balance between our need to grow independent of foreign energy sources with our need to preserve the environment. So there's progress and there's environmental preservation at work here, and there's tension between those two competing forces. But we know that we are all dependent on gas and oil. That's reality. Every day we use gasoline in our automobiles. We use natural gas to heat our homes. It drives our industry. We have it here. We don't necessarily need to import it from Saudi Arabia or elsewhere. But my point is, while we're doing that, we have to protect that great lake that I spoke of earlier, so that it is not contaminated, or the sources that contribute to the lake. So here's briefly what this legislation would do. We would prohibit injection wells in the 100-year floodplain so they wouldn't be flooded out. We would want transponders on the wellheads so that we would know in real time if there's an issue there. And one person from ODNR could be watching these 24/7 to make sure that there's no issues, especially with respect to seismic activity. We would have transponders on the trucks so that we know where that well is delivered at all times. I mean, we've had incidences in the past where that brine has been just dumped on the roads, and we can't have that taking place either. We would also be looking at groundwater monitoring constantly around, before and after the injection wells were drilled, to make sure that the groundwater is not getting polluted. And along with that, there would be tracer elements within the brine so that it's like a fingerprint, we would be able to see exactly if there were a leak, if there was a leak, indeed which well that was emanating from. We would allow the public comment period on injection wells to be extended to 28 days. Currently it's 15 days. There would be some air quality monitoring around the wells, because we know that there are some methane issues. The point of the matter is, and there are others on this list, it's still a working document, we are trying to balance progress with preservation. Very difficult thing to do, very timely, but there are a number of us that are dedicated to working on that, and that definitely impacts the 99th District. Another issue of great concern is charter school reform. A great deal of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, have been spent on charter schools, and the results are not what we expected. Now, let me be clear. I do support a parent's right to choose what form of education is best for his or her sons and daughters, but I expect the same standards from our charter schools that we would from our public schools, and that means transparency, and that means being absolutely upfront about all activities, as you would expect a public school to be. So back in June, there was a bill, HB 2, that dealt with charter school reform. Passed out of the House, went to the Senate. The Senate improved upon it because one of my fellow senators, Peggy Langer from Southwest Ohio, had been working on this issue too. House Bill 2 came back as an amended version as a result of the work in the Senate. And right before recess, we tried to accept the Senate version. There were a number of us, a coalition of Democrats and Republicans, who were anxious and excited about passing that bill. It never came to the floor. Leadership blocked it because they felt, leadership on the other side of the aisle, felt that it needed more time to study. Now, I find that rather ironic, because earlier we had passed in less than 24 hours a bill that allows the state to take over Youngstown city schools. We could do that in 24 hours, and the plan to bring about that strategy was developed in secret, behind closed doors, without a lot of public input. We could pass that in 24 hours, and I voted against that. But we couldn't pass something that we had studied openly, had hearings about, had been vetted over the course of this spring. I just found it disingenuous. My point is, there are a number of us who still want to make charter school reform it's a matter of principle. We have to do what's right for you, the public. It's your taxpayers' dollars, hard-earned dollars, going to support these charter schools. They need to be held accountable, and I continue to work on that. Another issue that concerns me is school funding. The budget had a lot of twists and turns, as you can well imagine. I served on the subcommittee, primary, secondary subcommittee, in terms of public school education. And we developed a workable budget that was going to take time to implement, but would have put us more in alignment with the DeRolf decisions. It was tinkered with in the Senate, and then when it came back to us, the governor line item veto a provision that is going to really hurt schools that rely heavily on TPP funding, and that's a tax at tangible personal property tax is levied on business. That's being phased out. Well, as that's being phased out, schools are going to have to rely on property owners even more to keep open. Our version would have kept that provision in place until we could have arrived at a more solid funding plan. The governor simply line item vetoed that. So schools are going to be doing without that in the second year of their budget, which means that they're going to be coming up short with money. And I talked to a school in our district. They're losing $600,000 in year 2 of this biennium budget. There's a group of us that are willing to challenge the governor's veto. We will attempt to override it so that those schools aren't hurt. In this district, Edgewood and Chardon are 2 of the most. Geneva's out there too, that might be impacted, are going to be impacted the way things stand. But admittedly, that's going to be a difficult thing to do, to override his veto, because, as you well know, he is running for higher office, and I'm sure he doesn't want to deal with a legislature that has overridden one of his vetoes. But his argument is that these schools should be able to stand on their own, and perhaps that is the case at some point down the road. But as it is, we've squeezed schools, we've squeezed local government funding, and the state has balanced its government, or balanced its budget, but on the backs of the locals. And you, the property owners, have had to deal with this issue firsthand. So point of the matter is, there is almost about $1.8 billion in the rainy day fund. And the state economy is humming along. And it is time to man up at the state level and to fully fund our schools the way they need to be for the betterment of our children, and it is an investment in our workforce to be. Without an educated workforce, business and manufacturing aren't really going to stay or be attracted to Ohio. It's one of the things we can't cut short. So we're working on that issue too. Another thing, speaking of schools, that is of deep concern, with changes to the retirement system and with increased burdensome regulations from the state, a lot of teachers are either retiring if they can or seeking to get out if they can. And what's more, at the very beginning of the teacher pipeline, we have some issues with exceedingly low numbers of individuals going into the field. And that's problematic for me. The most important person for your child's growth, once that door of the classroom is shut, is the teacher. The bus drivers are important, the secretaries are important, the administration is important, but when all is said and done, whoever's running that classroom, we want the most talented individuals teaching our children. And my question is, how do we attract and how do we retain the best people possible for our children? I'm working again with Senator Lehner. We are going to be exploring the possibility of a task force statewide, moving around this wonderful state to figure out and have open public commentary as to how to attract and retain the best people. And good teaching is an art. And I've 29 years I watched my colleagues in our district and others craft lesson plans and teach lessons that were exciting, invigorating, and turned students on, and attracted students to education and lit the fire. I want those kinds of teachers in the classroom. I want to affirm our teachers. I want to be able to see the spark in our students' eyes every day so that when they come home to you at night, they're excited about what took place in the classroom. We've beaten up our students. We've beaten up our teachers. We've beaten up our administrators with the testing, with the lack of funding. We've discouraged them, and it's time to turn that around because of all of our resources, our children are our most precious. And an investment in them is an investment in the future. And as a result, I feel strongly that we need to figure out how to fund schools, how to get the best people in our schools, and then let them do their work so that we can have the workforce that we need to move this state forward. Another issue that's coming up, and it will be on the ballot this fall, is Issue 1. And Issue 1 deals with redistricting in the state of Ohio. As you well know, the 99th District was reconfigured after the last census. Ashtabula County was split into two districts, essentially, the 99th encompassing most of Ashtabula County, but the southern tier was lumped into the Trumbull District, and the 99th, in return, was given part of Geauga County, which has worked out fine from my perspective. But the point of the matter is that there were other districts that were just drawn willy-nilly to support one party, and both parties are guilty, by the way, of gerrymandering. Now, why do I mention this? Because this amendment, and it has received bipartisan support in the House and in the Senate, would create an independent body, if you will, to examine and to promote more fair district lines. It's given the precinct nature of the state of Ohio, it's going to be impossible to draw perfect districts. Some districts simply lend themselves more to one party or the other. And we're not looking for perfection here. We're looking for fairness and equity. Our district is one such example. We are, the 99th District, only slightly Democratic. And as a result, it's about 52% Democratic. As a result, and I support this sort of a bipartisan mix for this reason. No one who holds this seat can ignore the ideas or the concepts of a member of the opposition party. By having districts drawn fairly, there is an equal voice and equal pressure put on any candidate or any office holder to listen intently to both sides. And I take great pride in the fact that I work for all of the people of this district without regard to party affiliation, because by doing what's right for all, this district as a whole benefits. And I would like that to be replicated in some of the other districts that perhaps have a substantial party affiliation one way or the other. It's healthy when we all can come together at the same table and work through our problems together. Recently, for all of you back-to-school shoppers, we enjoyed the sales tax holiday. And from all the reports that I've heard from local merchants, it was a wonderful success. The stores were packed, shelves were stripped of their back-to-school supplies, and the walk-in traffic was just incredible. And I was a proud sponsor of the companion legislation in the House of Representatives to make that indeed a reality for us here, especially in the border counties. Those of you who have lived here for years, and we were part of that when our boys were growing up, would make the annual pilgrimage to Pennsylvania to buy clothes because boys always growing, of course, and because it was cheaper with the lack of sales tax. Well, by stripping that away, we helped level the playing field and keep those dollars circulating right here in Ashtabula County and Geauga County for our local merchants. So it was a one-year pilot study. They're compiling the information now in terms of tax receipts and such to see if it's something that we should continue to pursue in the state of Ohio. I would indeed support that because it is so important to us. Now, there's some districts in the inner part of the state that might have some different ideas, but we know that there has been dollars lost all the time to Mill Creek Mall, to Grove City Outlets, other places in Pennsylvania where people go to buy their clothes. So all reports, it went well, and it was my privilege and my pleasure to help move that legislation forward so that our local merchants in Northeast Ohio could benefit along with our working families. So I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned. We'll keep you in touch with this whole process as it moves forward to see if we can institutionalize the sales tax holiday. But again, thank you for your support, and looking forward to trying to make this a permanent reality. As you all know, I travel a lot around the 99th District and have a tremendous amount of interaction with our constituents. One thing I am hearing time and time again is this: things are starting to turn around. It's slow, but it's turning around. And I want to give you one such example. Within the last week, I had the opportunity of running into a local realtor, in fact, right here in Jefferson. And I asked him how the market was going and are houses selling, because that is an indicator. If people have money, they're able to make that transition from renting to buying. And that's even more remarkable because our population has been, as a state, diminishing. So if we have less people able to buy our empty houses or houses that are on the market, that's a good sign that maybe there is an influx of new people. Perhaps wages are rising, and that's what we want as well. But my point is, there are a lot of factors. I asked him how things were going. He said, "John, you won't believe this, but I could use a break." And I looked at him incredulously. "You need a break?" He said, "Yes, we have been swamped. We have been swamped." I said, well, good. I want you to be working overtime, because that is an indicator of a healthy community when houses are buying. And if you look around the county, and now I know there are pockets, but if you look around the county, if you look around Geauga County, real estate is starting to turn over. And I base this, and I want to get in touch with all my realtors, but I'm hearing this time and time again that things are starting to turn around. And my point is this: together, working hand in hand with the business community, the agricultural community, the tourism community, our schools, our local governments, we can reinvent ourselves with a diversified economy, with an educated workforce, with a healthy workforce, with a quality environment, and with a workforce that gets a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. We can reinvent this 99th District. We are so well situated, have so much potential in terms of transportation, agriculture, business community, human resources. I believe in all my heart in the future of this district, and I thank you for your continued efforts as we move forward. And it is, after all, our district and our future.